Hello and welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today will be part 2 of our discussion with the Grandmasters of British Columbia and Yukon and Washington about their Grand Masonic years that are coming to an end and what we can look forward to in the near future.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Hello, I'm Very Worshipful Brother Matthew Appel, and I and Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth are Masons here in the great state of Washington. And we have also with us our two other usual hosts, Right Worshipful Brother Trevor McKeown and Worshipful Brother Chung, who both live up in British Columbia. And we have our special guests agreed to come back, which sometimes surprises me that they agree to come back. But we have with us again Most Worshipful Brother Chris Kaufman, who's the Grandmaster of Free and Accepted Masons of Washington, and Most Worshipful Brother Don McKenzie, who's the Grandmaster of the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Ancient Free and Accepted Masons of British Columbia and the Yukon. So, Most Worshipful Brothers, thank you both for coming out.
Thank you.
And where we left off last time, our last recording, we were talking. This Most Worshipful Brother Don was going to discuss his plans for the immediate future here. So,
well, for those of you that don't know, when the caseload became evident that British Columbia was not going to have enough vaccines done early enough to have a Grand Lodge, and I still stick to my guns on that, it's not going to happen. We went to the Constitution Committee and asked if there was any reason why we couldn't do it or shouldn't do it. Because we had all kinds of suggestions on what we should do. And I'm sure Most Worshipful Brother Chris has had lots of suggestions this year as well, same as we did. Well, we could do it online. Washington does it online, or the Shriners are doing it online. Well, we're not the Shriners, and we're not the Grand Lodge of Washington. Our Constitution is a little bit different. And it's pretty clear. We meet in June and have our Grand Lodge in person. And we don't have online balloting, and we don't have online this. We don't have open installations. So it was just, my thoughts were it was the easiest and the best thing to do for the craft, not necessarily. And I'm sure my brother Chris will, after this year, I know Chris was quite anxious to get out of his position, just to go back to normal life. And I bit the bullet, so to speak, and we're going to stay for all of my officers are staying, district deputies are staying in place for another year to give them a chance to fulfill their duties a bit better. And the way I looked at it is, why would you change your administration during a crisis? So, and we were still in the crisis in British Columbia, right? So
that's been a question that's actually been asked. Is it going to be for another year, or until, let's say in 5 months, 4 months, everything's great and they open it all up for us here in BC and we can get back to meeting? Are we going to have a Grand Lodge then, or would it be next June?
Just think, like we've had to do all year, Stephen. What would that do for the next Grand Master? He's going to have 5 months and then he's going to get thrown out. And that's right. We researched all those different things. Everything sounds like it's really easy, but one thing impacts the next thing, impacts the next thing, impacts the next thing. So, no, we're going to stay in place, and hopefully we'll do most of our visits in person this year, which we haven't done. I did have the opportunity. I went to the Yukon, and it wasn't official because the lodges weren't open and COVID was around and everything else, but I still got to meet the brother, and it was a very nice trip. And I did a couple on the island, open installations before things got locked down, But other than that, we're just going to carry on, do the best we can, and hopefully we can spend the next half of our tenure as Grand Master uniting the craft, and maybe we'll be able to help it along the way, because we're kind of abreast of what's all going on. When I talked about people with suggestions. And believe me, there was lots of them. But you just sort of have to sometimes put blinders on and do what's best, because we've already researched a lot of we thought about doing those things, and by the time you work through it, and I'm sure Chris will back me up on that,
Yes.
there's nothing that's going to work. That's the comment of the GPS, right?
Yep. Well, talking about suggestions, I said we'd have one member from each lodge there, and they can carry the proxies for their lodge, but we're not having the past masters come in and vote like they normally would. And then I had a lot of people come up and say, well, why don't you just do it like you got the people there, and then you can do the electronic, and all you have to do is add them together. And then I explained that we have 19 resolutions, and we have elections of officers and trustees. And every time you do that, you add 5 minutes to what's going on minimum. And they went, oh, okay. And then but we thought about all those things too. But sometimes you just have to explain what the process you're going through so brethren understand. And once they do, they're usually pretty reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you're working on event planning like that, as you said, if 5 minutes times 20, it's adds up really fast.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. From a personal standpoint, I'm really glad that the decision was made for Grand Lodge to continue the way it is for the next year. We made that same decision in our lodge because our worshipful master had got installed and had one meeting, and then that was it. And he hasn't had the opportunity to be received in the various lodges as he visits, and the way things were done before. And that personal connection, I think, is so important that I mean, guys, got to admit, being received on Zoom and being received in a Grand Lodge or in any of your lodges is a two totally different feelings, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that by if it had gotten to continue, both the Grand Lodge line officers and the regular lodge officers would have been deprived of that experience that they should experience before their year's out.
We had that comment brought up, but it wasn't even that. It was what was best for the craft. We had all kinds of conversations. You're talking about monthly meetings, Chris. We were having daily meetings over it sometimes. Yeah. And luckily, I've got a Grand Lodge, bunch of Grand Lodge officers that are we're all on the same page. So that really helps. Like, we can go to some of these meetings, and if I'm not there, the deputy gives exactly the same, because we're all on the same page. There's not a different answer. And believe me, we've had some hot and heavy meetings when you visit lodges and they say, well, you can meet in the restaurant with 6 people or go to a church with 10 people as long as they're distance. And I says, well, we're not a church. And really, it doesn't say that in there about the restaurants. So
we were limited at 10 for a while, and it's varied, but it's usually been 10 people not in your family, not in your household in a 2-week period. So if I met with you, Don, one day, and then David the next, and Stephen the next, well, that's now I've got 3. I can only meet with 7 more people.
That's right. Yeah. If you look at
they don't read the whole thing. Yeah.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I had to straighten out a couple of people there. They said, well, this, and this. And I says, well, how many do you think you can meet with now? And they said, well, we measured our lodge out, and according to social distancing, we can have 22 in there. I says, do you know? The law actually says you can meet with 2 people. And you're not special. Other than that, it'll cost you $2,500 or $2,700 as a fine. So we can't be responsible for what you're doing 600 kilometers from here, or 300 miles from here. So you better get in tune with what the program is. Otherwise, you're going to be in a pile of hurt.
Well, and that's why I ended up having to issue very strict rules as to what you have to do if you meet in person, because most of the lodges weren't reading what they could do, and didn't quite understand why. I told them they couldn't have meals when they have in-person meetings now, and some people they just don't understand that if the building allows them to have meals, they have to act like a restaurant. Everybody who's serving the food has to have a food handler's permit. They have to have all the technology and stuff that goes with that. And most of the lodges don't have it. Yeah. So let's just, yeah,
Exactly the same thing here, Chris. Yeah.
yeah.
It always, Grandmaster Chris, you talked about in your forums, which again, I'll echo what Matt said. They were an amazing addition. I hope they continue. I'm sure Right Marshal Cameron will do something along those lines. And but as you mentioned, the same questions would come up over and over again. And one of them that still drives me crazy is, and I want to meet, I want in person just as bad as the next guy, but what can you do in person under the COVID rules that you couldn't do over Zoom? We can't do degree work anyway. We can't do some of the other things we couldn't do anyway. So all you could do is pay bills basically, and have some education and all those things. We could do everything on Zoom.
Right.
Virtually, that we under the rules now, under the state rules. That's not saying that we don't want to do those things. I'm not saying that we should change those things, but under the state rules of the time, and you were doing the best that you could. That's what. So I felt just as bad for you.
Oh, thank you. But we had to educate. Like Don was saying, they can't do those things. So you have to tell them, because so many of the brothers would read half of what they said. It's just like our governor came out and said he was going to follow the CDC regulations for masking, and if you're fully vaccinated, you don't need to. What he said was, we will adopt those rules. And he directed the Department of Health and LNI to update all the regulations and stuff. I had 2 or 3 brothers call me and say, well, he adopted them, so we don't have to wear masks anymore. No, he didn't. He will adopt them. There's a different thing there. They don't. They hear what they want to hear.
Exactly.
So most worshipful Don. So you there won't be any kind of annual communication for BC and Yukon then, or will there be some kind of?
There won't be, and we don't have time even now to try to organize one or a venue. And then even if Vancouver Island was deemed safer than the Lower Mainland where the hotspot is, the people on Vancouver Island are not going to want a bunch of people from the Lower Mainland over there. They're going to be flattening our tires in the ferry parking lot, right? So, which has happened, by the way, not Masons, but stealing people's cars, slashing tires.
And keep in mind that this year was supposed to be, or is, our 150th celebration. So we had a whole lot of plans for celebrations, and we've had to gear back on a lot of that, and hopefully a lot of that will be transferred to our next annual communication. But with this short notice, there's no way we could bring all of that back up to speed again.
Right, exactly.
Understood.
So the easiest thing to do is to just calm down a little bit and just say we're going to stay in place. And hopefully, since we're all working as a pretty good team right now, including our district deputies, hopefully as soon as we're allowed to meet, I can give a couple of rulings. I can make the lodges be able to do installations if they want to get their installation done after June. Mm-hmm. And I would encourage them to do that because, as I said before, we don't even know at this point whether this vaccine is going to do what we're hoping it's going to do.
The Grand Master, in his rulings earlier this year, gave our lodges permission to do an awful lot in Zoom in terms of decision making, not voting on candidates, but certainly suspending for non-payment of dues just to get them off the roll at the end of the year, things of that nature. And the ruling said you can make all the decisions you want in a Zoom meeting, but minutes have to be carefully kept. And the minute you're back in a tiled meeting, you have to adopt all of those. So that's going to be a big part of the first meeting of all of our lodges.
Yes, it
when
is.
we get to meet again is adopting everything that they've already decided on.
And the interesting thing to that is some people think that those things that they're deciding can actually be enacted now, but they don't actually come into play or come into effect until they're ratified upon return.
At a Grand Lodge, a lot of them do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But
Now-
a lot of the things are practical ones that they've had to take care of right away, such as paying the bills, suspending people for non-payment, and other things of that nature. But so they've had to actually act on them now, and we've used a rarely used section of our Constitution, which actually allows the master of a lodge to make a whole lot of decisions, and no member can appeal his decision except the Grand Lodge. So the Grand Master will just rubber stamp it all when it comes, if anyone does decide to object after the fact. And we always have a few members who are more interested in procedure than what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, we all run into that. And I did something very similar. We gave our executive committee, which is the master, warden, secretary, and treasurer, power to pay the bills and then report them at the first stated meeting, not to ratify, just to report them. We also had questions about demits. People wanted to drop out. Technically, it has to be read at a stated meeting. I said, well, we can't have stated meetings, but if the person requests it and they qualify, they get it. So just give it to them. And same thing with NPDs. And they just have to report it. I didn't want them having to ratify it because I didn't want some master to get in trouble for paying the rent and then have them not ratify it and then say, well, no, you paid $500 worth of rent. Now pay us back, or something like that. So I just said, yeah, you just report it.
Some of those earlier meetings were a bit of a Donnybrook, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know ours was for our lodge. I tried to send out everything in an email beforehand, and then sort of referenced it during the meeting and said, if there's anything else you want to talk about on that, let me know. And as the secretary, I was trying to smooth the path there as much as I could, but
Right.
we went over it in broad strokes anyway. So, excuse me, just to go back a topic, Most Worshipful Don, is there a provision in the BC and Yukon Constitution that the Grand Master can make these decisions? Was it a jurisprudence thing? Was it just what was the process there?
Well, it was a lot of consultation and going over the Constitution, but the Grand Master has quite a bit of latitude as far as making decisions. And it had to be done. Like I think we spoke the last time I was on here about nothing was done after 1918. Trevor told us the history of there. They were just more happy to get back to having lodge meetings, and away they went again. But
after the influenza epidemic, we barely slowed down, it seems here. I was hoping I could quickly find the sections of the Constitution which we cited, but we carefully reviewed our Constitution, and I'm not going to say we played fast and loose, but we certainly interpreted some of the sections just to allow things to get done. Possibly we were on shaky ground with some of them, but the Grand Master did consult with the Constitution Committee, with jurisprudence, with protocol, and got a consensus that he did, within certain limits, he had the authority to allow the lodges to proceed with certain things. And I don't think we're going to have too many members a year later come up and get on their high horse about procedure and say, you didn't do this properly. I think there's going to be a consensus that, well, our Grand Master did what needed to be done just to get us through this.
Yeah, so. I'm hoping so, Trevor.
I'm doing my best.
It was touch and go there for a while. Yeah.
Well, and we had something very similar. In fact, I was going to have our jurisprudence committee draft up a resolution that specifically gave Grand Master the power to deal with emergencies and blah, blah, blah. And then the more we looked at it, we said, well, the Grand Master's powers, according to the installation ceremony, are nigh absolute. We have a general provision in our Constitution that says Grand Master can do anything that's consistent with the code or necessary to be done. So we figured out we just do it. we didn't do it willy-nilly, but we felt we did have the power to do what needed to be done, sort of like what Don was doing.
Yeah.
So we did what needed to be done.
Yeah, like when you issued your ruling, Chris, in December, I think it was, about what you were going to do when you were going to open up again.
Yeah.
We'd already had, so the lodges could do their business, basically. Do demits, suspensions,
Yeah.
So we didn't have to. Sorry.
How does it work? Like in a regular lodge, of course, the master can't resign. And so if the next guy doesn't want to and the lodge doesn't elect or whatever, then it's kind of a default. It just happens. And so I know you talked extensively about how it was fortunate that your Grand Line and other officers and everybody agreed to just continue. But was there something, did you have to make an edict, or did the jurisprudence, if you have that, did they have to make something, or is it just kind of we're just going to let it happen and you roll into the next year? Or, I mean, I could see it maybe not really happening, but potentially the idea that some guy down the road says, well, I don't want to leave. Then what happens?
Well, I think history, Trevor should be able to do it. I'm not sure if I'm the first one. I think there was another past Grand Master that served a couple of terms, if I'm not mistaken. But our Constitution is quite explicit. And we don't have the outs like Washington has, for instance, of having open installations. Our installation has to be middle of June, as close to St. John's Day as possible. We meet in person. We install all of our officers, and I repeat, all of the officers in person, and we ballot on them in person. So I thought it would be better if I stuck to the Constitution rather than tried to be wishy-washy and say, well, we can do it, but you can't do it. And that's another thing that, thinking ahead, Chris, I didn't want to be classed as the guy that did things just because it was Grand Lodge and the lodges couldn't do it. So
in answer to the specific question about lodges, though, where you had a master who didn't want to carry on or did want to carry on or whatever, we've had a few. Yes. And well, our Grand Master has not been making, as you say, willy-nilly decisions on his own. In fact, sometimes he's taken, to my mind, way too long to make a decision. He'll consult with everybody. Something that's been a working mantra for our Grand Secretary, pretty much since he started in the office 10 years ago, was that we follow the Constitution, we follow our bylines, we follow our rules, but more importantly, we follow the intent of those rules, which is where I play a large role, because as the Grand Historian, I can go back and say, okay, this is what they were saying in the reports back then when they made these rules. This was what they were thinking of. And his mantra is basically to ask, does anyone get hurt by this decision? And if nobody gets hurt, well, then we're pretty much on solid ground Masonically. And then we'll sort out the exact procedural questions of the Constitution as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was really looking forward to coming up to your annual communication this year, especially with the 150th anniversary. And now I can't even come visit Steve, let alone, now with the 2-week quarantine, by the time my vacation's over, I got to go back home again. Has there been any idea of that changing, or do you know when that might occur for us to be able to come and visit?
Well, no, I haven't been I have a place in Washington. I haven't been down there for 13 or 14 months. Right? And I have I've got a bus sitting down in Washington that I haven't seen in 13 or 14 months. Luckily, it's plugged in and it's undercover. But yes.
If you'd like me to check that out, just let me know. And
my Grandmaster has his own mantra this year. You ask, when do we know anything about when the 2 weeks will be lifted and all of that? His response to many of these questions are, we are not driving the bus. It's our provincial office. So,
perfect example of that is what we're facing going ahead of us. We have to be prepared for all of these things. Are they going to try to put these vaccine passports in effect? And we're noticing right now that a lot of the cruise lines are doing that. even in the US, I believe, and they're not letting people get on the ships unless they've got proof of vaccinations. You can carry that. But what's going to happen in our lodges? That already came up. A lot of people have said, well, I won't be going back to lodge until everybody's vaccinated.
I think you've touched another issue moving forward, Grandmaster. I think there will be a certain hesitancy.
Oh, yes.
Certainly from some of our older members, that they're not going to want to go into lodge, regardless of whether the provincial health officer says it's okay, regardless of whether you say it's okay. They're going to be nervous. So each lodge will deal with that on its own.
They're going to have to. That's right.
Yeah.
That was my point of doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have brothers who don't want to have to show proof that they've been vaccinated, but they don't want to carry that information around. They don't think they should have to.
That's right.
So,
Same here. It's no different here, Chris.
We've got our annual meeting, and I set out protocols for our annual communication. One of them says you have to wear a mask at all times. That was before the new CDC things. I haven't figured out what I'm going to do yet. Now that, CDC and maybe the governor by that time says, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And I've tried to just keep the limitations consistent. I'm not sure how I say, okay, you haven't been vaccinated, but you have, so you don't have to wear a mask and you do. I don't know how that's going to work. I just have to, weighing those issues are going to be tough ones to figure out.
Maybe they'll do it by social distancing the way it was done previously too.
Yeah. Yeah. And as long as they keep that part of it, I think we're going to be much better off.
Yeah. But yes, we had a lot of thought went into serving the other term. And, part of it was because of the Constitution. I didn't think it was right of me as the Grand Master. Like when we go into a lodge, we always state that the Book of Constitution precedes the Grand Master, because not even the Grand Master is above the Constitution. So I figured, at least I'm safe that way. Well, sort of, but but it's been an unusual year. I'll say that.
That's for certain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we certainly appreciate you both coming.
And you guys have, I'm sure, have had more challenges than any other Grandmaster before you because of these extenuating circumstances. And again, we really want to thank you guys for making the time to come on and share those experiences with our listeners, especially.
Mm-hmm. I got my Masonic notice for this meeting today, and that was very good. So
I got mine on the way to the grocery store. Did I say that out loud?
How was the teriyaki?
Well, it was actually turned out really good.
Very good.
Things behind the scenes here at the Working Tools podcast sometimes even flow less smoothly than they do in the front of the scenes in the Working Tools podcast. So it's if you can imagine that, yes. So to just echo what everyone else has said, thank you both, most worshipfuls, for being here today and at our previous recording. And we look forward to seeing you ride into the sunset and enjoy your future Masonic careers when that happens. Not that we're trying to get rid of you. Oh dear, no, I've stuck my foot in, haven't I? But anyway, thank you for being here, and thank you for all the work you've put into this year. And as Steve said, it's certainly been a challenge. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank all of you, and thank you, Don, for being here. Yeah. And thank you for being my friend.
Yes, and that's one thing that some of these conferences and whatever really helped Chris. I've attended quite a few of Chris's meetings down there, and I may even join a lodge in Washington when things go. Yes.
And on that note, thank you all for being here, and thank you for listening to our listeners. And on behalf of Steve and Trevor and David and myself, thanks, and have a good night.
Good night.
Night, everybody.